Hello, everybody. This is yours truly coming to you. I know it's been a while, and possibly it might be a while before we get back together. And so I just wanted to walk you through some key issues that we're going to look at this week. I recognize many of you have a lot going on, but I am hoping that everyone is okay. My goal for this afternoon is just to clarify about three things. As you've seen in the syllabus, we're going to talk about intercultural competence and collaboration. But sometimes students are often not quite clear what it means in terms of definition, its orientations, and why this matters, particularly for transition practitioners. So let's start with the definition itself. As you've seen in the readings for this week, mind you, keep in mind, this is really important. This video should not be used as a substitute for the readings that I posted. Make sure that you go through the readings just as much as you watch the video today. In terms of definition, intercultural competence simply means cognitive, affective, and behavioral skills that allows us to be able to navigate cultural boundaries with ease and automaticity. Cognitive skills simply means the way we think. Affective skills means the way we feel, and then, of course, the behaviors that we observe. All of that put together, we're talking about cognitive, affective, and behavioral skills that allows us to be able to navigate cultural boundaries with ease and automaticity. So, in terms of definition, what that means is that intercultural competence exists on a spectrum. And as you can see from the posted notes, the spectrum goes all the way from the denial up till adaptation. And that means that folks can often move along the spectrum back and forth depending on the issue at hand. However, what Hammer and his colleagues say is that all of us have some kind of a primary orientation that we operate on under typical circumstances. So it could be that maybe your primary orientation is minimization. However, sometimes under stress or when you encounter some radically different experiences, you might end up moving back to defense. So there's always that shift back and forth along that spectrum. Equally important, what that means is that intercultural competence is not a destination. You don't read enough until you say, I'm good to go. This is something that you continually work on to become better. I have been doing this work for probably now 14 or so years. But I can't tell you how many times I find some really, really new things that I have to adjust on when it comes to intercultural competence. And so intercultural competence is not a destination. It is a journey that requires consistent work to be able to grow. As I mentioned earlier, Hammer says that as far as intercultural competence is concerned, we typically operate from about five different orientations. The first is defense. And one key indicator of a person who is acting on this particular orientation is that this person is able to identify obvious cultural differences like clothing, language, and things like that. But they are less sophisticated when it comes to identifying less obvious elements of culture, such as belief systems. And what that means in real life is that a person who is acting from a denial orientation is one who is less likely to attribute people's behavior to culture. Like you will not hear them say, oh, I think they're doing that because that is their culture. They're more likely to use, and I love this classic American word, weird. It's like, oh, this is really weird. Weird meaning it's different from mine. Keep in mind that the entire spectrum is subdivided into three different parts. The first two orientations are what we call monocultural orientation. And then you have minimization, which is right in the middle. And then you have the last two, which are considered intercultural orientations. So one classic thing about the monocultural orientations is that people still behave in this world where you define the whole world based on your own worldview. So what that means is that if it's not true for me, then it's not true for everybody else. And so if I don't agree with it, then the other folks should not agree with it. Then the second orientation obviously is polarization, which comes out in two different forms. Before we look at those two forms, polarization is all about us versus them. The belief that you can only have one reality. We can't have multiple realities existing at the same time. The first element of polarization, of course, is the defense. And that often manifests in the sense that one feels that the presence of something different is threatening to their own existence. For example, you'll often hear some folks say, oh, we have too many Mexicans moving into town, so we should do something about it. Even for folks whose lives have zero connections with whatever group of Mexicans they are talking about. Just the idea that something that is different is threatening to their lifestyle. The other form of polarization is reversal, where a person denigrates their own culture while elevating the other culture. It's like, oh, we guys are terrible, but you guys have got it right. So that's the position where it's always us versus them, where we can't have multiple realities. It has to be one thing or the other. Then after those two, then you move into the transitional orientation, which is minimization. And according to Hammer, he says that minimization is that orientation that a person operating from it tends to gravitate to similarities, where we focus people on what we agree on while ignoring everything else that we disagree on. Oftentimes, this is the main orientation that teachers that I've known tend to operate from. There are two primary problems with this orientation. Number one is that when you tell people, let's just focus on what we agree on and ignore the differences, in a sense, you're telling those that are different that different is bad. And that's a terrible thing to do. And then the second thing you're also doing is that you are gravitating or moving people towards the mainstream. Like, okay, let's just do this one thing. Let's just all speak English. See, all these other languages, this is problematic. Let's just speak all English, which is essentially moving people to the mainstream while ignoring all the other differences that we value. And then after minimization, you have the acceptance orientation. The defining feature about acceptance is the idea that you come to a place where you see your lifestyle as just one of the many valid ways of living, and that other ways of living are equally valid. They may not be yours, but it is a valid way of living. And the example I like using is the example about marriages, where some people do polygamy, monogamy, polyandry, and all kinds of things. A person who operates from an acceptance orientation is one who is able to say that, well, while for me monogamy is my thing, those who choose to do polygamy or sologamy, that's fine as well. It may not be my choice, but it is just as valid as mine. So that is acceptance. The key thing about acceptance is that you come to a place where you are able to suspend judgment for a moment before you make a decision, and you're able to seek information, which is something that does not happen in other orientations before acceptance. And so when you meet something new, you step back and say, oh, what am I missing in all of this? What's new? And why are these people doing this? So that once you are informed, then you can make a choice. So before you go ahead and say something is weird, step back and ask, oh, okay, this looks new. What's going on here? You seek to understand. You suspend judgment, and then you make your decisions. Now, after acceptance, then you move on to adaptations as the final orientation. The key thing about adaptation is that you come to a place where you are able to then use your understanding to adapt your behaviors or make changes to your behaviors so that you can successfully work with that person who is different from you. Now, the key about adaptation is not just a question of, okay, you are going to be a different person. Your goal here is to be successful while working with a different person. And so, based on your concrete understanding of this or the new person, then you want to adapt your activities to make sure that you're successful in working with them. An example that I love to share is that when I started my teaching career many years ago in Kenya, I taught in an environment where eating in class was a no-no. And as I've shared with some of you in class, I struggled with that when I came to the US because people bring food to class. Now, after a while, once I understood the relationship between food and many events that people do in America, I have come to a place where I'm very comfortable with students bringing food to my class. Personally, I would not bring food to eat. That's just not my thing. But I make it possible, and I actually encourage students to bring food in my class. So that is an example where I'm actually adapting my behavior to be successful in working with other people. Again, keeping in mind, adapting does not necessarily mean you start behaving in the ways that are different from yours. You can if you want to, but it simply means you're going to change your actions with the primary goal of being successful while working with people who are different. So let's switch back to why this is important. There are many reasons why intercultural competence is important. Apart from the idea that intercultural competence enables you to work successfully with folks who are different from you, intercultural competence has been associated with many skills, such as conflict resolution. In fact, one study showed that folks who score very high on the intercultural competence scale tend to use very successful conflict resolution styles. And so this is an imperative that becomes really important for all teachers and all transition scholars. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that with intercultural competence, this is not something you're going to acquire simply because you have watched videos, you have read books, you have listened. The readings and the videos and all that just help in changing your skills and knowledge, and perhaps your attitude. In terms of your actual actions, it takes a little more work. So you have to go beyond the readings, you have to go beyond the videos, but to find authentic experiences that will allow you move along the spectrum. And that could mean sometimes you have to spend time, live with folks that are really different from you. And that will give you an authentic opportunity to actually change. Because oftentimes when we are comfortable, it's really easy to ignore some of these things and get back to our default mode. And so to make progress, you have to go beyond the reading. You have to take very deliberate steps that require actions that moves you along the spectrum. Now, I hope that explanation gives you some kind of a window as to what this is. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to email me or post it on the Q&A section, and I'll be sure to respond in due course. Thank you.